Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of Tiger Talk. I'm Jeremy. I'm the superintendent of schools, and I've got with me this time Sarah Kirchner. Sarah's our new director of finance. So, Sarah, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This episode of Tiger Talk is a little different than our normal ones. We're going to talk about specifically our budget situation for this year. We've been talking all year about some challenges that we've got with our budget currently. We'll talk a little bit about kind of what we're looking at for future projections with budget and some things the board is doing to address our budget situation. This month's episode is also unique in the fact that we're recording this to share specifically with MPS staff as well. So some specific things just talking about where we're at and some work Sarah's been doing to take a look at the budget for this year. So Sarah, we'll kind of walk through challenges. We'll talk about some expense adjustments. The board has authorized some reductions for this year in our budget, kind of a preliminary look at that. We'll talk about some revenue pieces that we've looked at, and then we'll talk about the overall impact, and then with staff, we're having some listening sessions from staff to talk about some additional pieces there. So go ahead and let you start with some financial challenges that we're facing.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, last month I did present our revised budget for this current school year to our school board for approval. And unfortunately, we are continuing to anticipate a deficit spending of approximately $1.1 to $1.3 million to end this school year. And so with this, we're anticipating that our ending general fund balance percentage will decrease to about 16.85% for the year. And that's actually down from 21% where we were at last year to end 2024's school year. So we also unfortunately are hearing not a lot from the state as far as any anticipated increases to our revenues from the state or the federal sources that we rely heavily on throughout the year. And we will likely be deficit spending then in our next upcoming school year, which is our fiscal year 2026. And that we're approximately estimating our deficit spending will be anywhere between $800,000 to $1 million to further reduce what would then be our ending general fund balance percentage of between 12 and 13%. So we are seeing some significant decreases to our fund balance percentages, and we are watching those closely.
And that would be assuming no changes in what we're currently doing.
Right.
So that's why we're talking about some changes, both for this year and for the future.
Correct. Yes. So next here, I have a slide that basically shows where our revenues are coming from throughout the school year. And you can see that 70% of our funding does come from state sources, and approximately 9% comes from federal sources, with most of the remaining portion, approximately 16%, coming from the local property tax levy.
I think we'll just talk about that just a little bit too, because I think some questions that we get about funding, school funding is just an unusual piece. It's not real typical. The state funds a lot of it. That piece from the federal government, some of the questions we've gotten lately are, with the talk at the federal level of closing the Department of Education, well, what happens to that funding piece? I know the paper recently ran a story about that too, but, we talk about those federal funding sources being in primarily with some food service funding, funding for special ed programs, some title funding. That's kind of the bulk of that. We don't anticipate that funding is going away. Just it might come from a different way. They're looking at more local control. So we don't anticipate a loss there. That's not the budget. That's not a budget crunch that we're looking at a change, but it's that state source, and the state is saying their forecast doesn't look good. They don't have additional funds. So to figure out how we use what we've got and how we can close that gap and continue to provide high quality programs for our kids.
Right. Yeah, so to look a little closer at that state source of funding, this graph shows the state's general fund adjusted formula allowance, and that's probably our biggest bucket of money we do receive from the state that we can use for any general purposes throughout the year. And that funding source on this graph is the orange dashed line, and you can see going back to 2023 that those funds have slowly increased over the years, but the blue line is actually what represents the
actual cost of education or inflation.
Our inflation rate. So we're looking at, for this year, that allowance is $7,281 per APU, or average pupil unit. So basically per student. And we just received notice that next year for 2026, that amount is going to increase by 2.74%, which actually equates to about $200 a student. So we're not seeing that raise fast enough to keep up with our inflation rates and causing that gap between inflation and that funding allowance to continue to grow apart. So again, no indication at the state level that that gap is going to decrease anytime soon.
Right. And this concern we're talking about with budget, this isn't just a Marshall thing. You see school districts across the state, across the country talking about these concerns. It's not that there is no money from the state, but the money that they're able to provide additional doesn't match the inflationary rates and the costs of providing education.
Right. So planning ahead, we've been doing a lot of work in keeping our school board up to date as far as what we're looking at for our deficit spending, and they have directed us to reduce our spending for the next school year by $250,000 to $350,000. So we've been doing a lot of work on figuring out where those reductions can come from. We've also looked at ways to increase our revenues. And so for the first time this year and into next year, we are going to be tapping into our reserves to cover those expenses. So in the coming years, we are going to need to find additional revenue sources and potentially make some significant spending cuts. We also are definitely considering looking at seeking an operating referendum as early as this fall. We have been very proud of Marshall Public Schools' history of fiscal responsibility, and we will continue to uphold this standard despite all of these challenges we are facing. We are taking it very seriously. Yeah.
And certainly the school board has a lot to do with these conversations, looking at how we can balance that. So the deficit spending this year, that's intentional deficit spending, knowing we have some reserves that we can use, just like we would do at home. How do we best balance the funds we have? And just knowing that our reserve amounts we can't do that indefinitely. There's only so much in reserve, so we can't completely deplete that. So how do we move forward? Our primary purpose is here to educate. We want to provide the best programming we can for our students. We know we have students with lots of needs. We have a lot of staff we need to make sure we're supporting, that they have the things that they need. Sarah mentioned this year, the reductions we're looking at are minimal impact to classrooms. We are able to trim some budget things and intentionally deficit spend and move through this year, but those are going to get harder to do going forward, and the cuts could get deeper if we don't continue to find a way to increase revenues or reduce expenses. So the expenses adjustments we're looking at for next year include looking at software purchases. We purchased a number of different softwares in the district, online programs that are used to enhance education. The conversation with that is looking at what are some things that are needs versus things that are wants. Certainly, we're able to provide a lot of things. We are a one-to-one district. All of our students have devices in their hands, but we do believe there's some potential savings and some software opportunities we have. And looking at curriculum, we have those specifics of what those are have not been identified yet. The target in that area is right around $7,000 in reductions for going forward. So we're working with the tech department and with buildings about what things we target with that. Supply budget is another area we're looking at. Supplies for school there's a lot of supplies we go through in school. A lot of budget is accounted for there. We feel like a 1% reduction across the board for this year will be the target. That amounts to about $5,000 for this year. And then CIS is College in the Schools. We offer a number of College in the Schools programs at the high school. We have a course that we have, as we've reviewed different things, one of the courses we identified had low enrollment, and we feel like taking that off the roster for next year will not have a big educational impact on our students, but it could save a little over $5,000 too. Overall, these savings are $17,500. Another area of savings for this year or for next year that we're proposing is some savings in retirements. These are some positions. First of all, we offered a retirement incentive to teacher group for this year. We had 4 teachers that have opted to take that. There was an incentive allowed as part of that. We will be rehiring all 4 of those positions. These aren't cuts in positions, but it's cuts in our savings in the cost of those positions. And these people have opted to take that. We also had 2 other retirements from other bargaining groups in the district that will amount to some projected savings as well. Overall, we see about $90,000 in savings from retirements for this year.
It's definitely nice to see savings through attrition because it's not impacting students directly, and we are continuing to replace the positions. It's just at a lower cost.
Right.
That is nice.
Right. The other area we talk about through attrition and looking at positions that we don't have somebody in now. That's another area that we looked at. We were able to identify a number of things there. Some of the vacant positions, we have some vacant positions we just weren't able to fill either last year or last couple of years even in the district that we are just going to stop budgeting for and eliminate the positions. One of those is the paramentor position. That's a position we added a couple of years ago to support our paraprofessionals. We haven't been able to keep someone in that position. It's just a very specific position, and having people for it hasn't worked out. We're going to eliminate that position. Para at the ALC, it's a position that had existed previously. There currently isn't a need through IEPs for that. So that's a position that will just cease to exist, and it's empty right now. No one's in that position right now. And EL Success Coach at Parkside, that's a position. It's a classroom aide that supports our EL learners at the Parkside level. This year we had some staffing changes kind of last minute within our EL department. The person that had been doing this job moved into a different role. So we haven't had this position all the year this year. Rather than refilling that position, we will eliminate that position for a cost savings. The first bullet point that I missed, that I haven't covered yet on this page, media aides. Media aides work in the libraries at the schools. Our elementary schools, we have one media aide at each library. The middle school and high school, we have two. We're looking to reduce one at each of those two sites, so it'll be elimination of two positions in the district. That will impact in some ways because it sort of changes the way the libraries operate, but it won't close libraries, it won't end services. It just changes maybe how those look throughout the day at those two sites. The custodial department reorganization is another area. So looking at some positions that we have in place and how we staff in custodial department. These specifically are, we have one of the retirements was a position at our ALC. It has been a lead custodian position. That will become a regular custodian position. So it's a savings in the cost of the staffing for that spot. Another area is we have an open position that has been a full-time position. We feel we can make a part-time position, still cover the custodial needs, but a cost savings. Reorganization of nursing services is the other one. Working with our nursing department, we have an opening in the nursing department as well. Traditionally, Marshall has had, we have great nurses. They provide great service for all of our kids at all of our sites. Traditionally, we've had a licensed school nurse, an RN, at each of the 5 schools. That isn't the case this year. We're using health aides in some settings this year. We're learning that can work. We're working with MDE and MDH on how to staff appropriately. And where we can find staff, to be perfectly honest. So looking at reorganizing and doing more of that model with health aides in the classrooms, with the licensed school nurse, the RNs overseeing some of that work, projecting some savings with that and how we structure that for the buildings as well. Overall, those staffing adjustments are $192,500 as a projected savings for that.
Yeah, so we've taken a lot of time to do a deeper dive into a lot of our positions and programming areas. So with that, by modifying our purchasing processes, some of our programming and staffing, we have come up with approximately $300,000 in expense reductions going into next year.
Which fits that target the board had given us to seek for this next year.
Yeah.
Beyond reductions, we are looking at some proposed revenue adjustments as well. The first one is CTE levy reimbursement. Our target is $75,000 with that. CTE levy reimbursement, to explain that, for career and technical education areas, there is a program approval with the state. If we fill out this program approval, explain the programming we're offering, and have teachers who are licensed in certain categories through the state, we can get a reimbursement of about 30% of our total cost of those programs back to the district. Currently, Marshall gets about $50,000 in reimbursement in that area. We've been working with our high school administration and teachers. They've put a lot of work into this year. Our programs are all up for reapproval this year. That's part of the just recurring process with those departments. But looking at what areas maybe could we get reimbursed for that we weren't currently getting reimbursed for, and then working with staff and getting some additional licensure to be able to make some of that line up. We feel $75,000 is a very realistic target for next year in additional revenues that we can gain there.
And that actually includes, salaries, supplies for those specific classes. So it's nice to see those reimbursements coming in and utilizing. Basically, we're receiving reimbursement for earned education courses. So
yeah, for classes we're offering, just making sure that we have the approval and the licensure to match them up. So
definitely.
And programming that we're passionate about, we're doing a lot of work with. So the other one is with 3-year-old preschool tuition. Our 3-year-old preschool tuition, the pricing of that has not changed in over 10 years in Marshall. We've done a little study looking at area preschools, what the costs are there. We feel like we were lower than many of them. This would project increase about $20 a month for the program would produce about $3,000 of additional tuition in that area, and keeps us in line with other programs, and those programs certainly continue to increase in cost for us as well.
Yep. So thus far, with all of the adjustments that we have talked about and put out there for review, we are projecting our total budget impact will be approximately $378,000 between reductions in expenses and potential increases in our revenues. So we're hoping that next school year will look a little better, obviously, than this year. We are still anticipating a deficit spending amount of approximately $800,000 to $1 million for the next school year. And while we're very proud of Marshall Public Schools' history of financial stability, like so many other districts across the state and even the nation, we will likely be seeking the community's support in potentially a operating referendum to help support our needs going into the future.
Yeah. So, like Sarah said, going forward, we'll just continue to look at where we're at, look at how we can continue to be fiscally responsible, meeting the needs of our students. We have great staff. We have amazing students. We want to continue to provide the best services we can for everybody on the team. So, appreciate everyone's time and attention on this. Appreciate all the ongoing support. We feel very well supported by our community in Marshall, and we continue to work toward future success in everything we do.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody.